Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters. So, as far as Islamic laws of inheritance, once you pass away, everything that you owned now becomes the right of your heirs and your children and your other heirs that are present at that time. And before we actually go about distributing anything to anybody, this is the sequence that takes place. So the very first thing that happens with the money and the estate that you leave behind is your funeral expenses are covered with that. So, whether that means purchasing a grave, whether it means if you already have a grave, the burial admin fees, the kafan, whatever it is that is involved, the transport fees. Our brother sitting to the left over there will give you a better idea of what is involved, what expenditures are involved in your burial. So that's the first thing that happens, right? And now, in order for these things to happen, the idea is you need to write this in your will, right? So I'm not going to be talking about preparing a will. That's the job of our lawyers. I'm just talking about the Islamic laws of what happens to your estate after you pass away. The next thing that your estate is applied. Now, let's say somebody has only left behind about $3,000 and the totality of that estate is used in burial expenses. So be it. This is, the heirs will get nothing, and the expenses of the burial will be covered first. After the burial expenses are covered, the next thing that your estate is applied towards is the repayment of debt that you owe throughout your life. So it's always important to keep an accurate record of the debt that you owe. Right? And this needs to go, and this is everything, by the way. So, the $5 you borrowed from somebody at the masjid all the way to the mortgage on your home, whatever it is, you need to include it. And this is all going to go into your will, and your estate is going to be applied towards paying off that debt, right? The third thing is wasiyah, right? Now, once these two things have been done, right? Your burial expenses have been covered, your debts have been repaid. Now we're going to take an inventory of your entire estate and what you own and how much it's worth. And then we're going to divide that into three parts, right? The first, and you have a right from the Sharia that you are able to allocate 1/3 of that estate to any cause that pleases you. You can donate it to the masjid, you can give it to your neighbor, you could do whatever you want with it. The only thing that you can't do with it is give it to somebody who already has a share in your inheritance. So basically what that would mean is that if we divide it into three and you decide that, my oldest son, I want him to have 1/3 of it. That means you're depriving the rest of your children of their share of inheritance. So the Sharia forbids this. You're not permitted to give that 1/3 to anybody who is already receiving a share of your inheritance. Is that understood? If there is somebody who would potentially have a share in your inheritance, and because of the way the laws of inheritance in Islam are structured, that they are structured at levels. So in the presence of certain heirs, certain other heirs will not receive their share. And unfortunately, we don't have time to go through all of those laws, but it is permitted to give one of those heirs that didn't receive a share something from the inheritance. Or, it is permitted, and again, this wasiyah can be made to a non-Muslim individual, to an entity, to your cat, or whatever you want to do with it, right? It's your money, it's your right, you can give it to whomever you please. Now there are three types of heirs in the Sharia, and three types of individuals, three categories of individuals that receive a share of your estate. And the first of these categories, quite often many of us sitting in this room will never go ahead of the first category over here, right? So if you have children, for example, then your estate is pretty much, it's finished, right? So we know where it's going to go. There are certain more complex cases where people don't have children, or anyone from the first category is not present, and those estates become a little bit more complicated. Or sometimes it becomes a little bit more complicated if the estate of your father or your grandfather, or anybody down the line was not distributed correctly, and now you're looking to correct the past, right? So then we will have to sit down and we'll have to rack our brains as to who passed away at what time, what descendants did they leave behind, who amongst their descendants are still alive. It's a painstaking process. So the easiest way to do this is you write a will and you get your estate distributed as soon as you die, or soon after you die, inshallah. So the first type is the sharers. We call them in Arabic dhawil furud. Dhawil furud means those people who has been allocated a share inside the Quran, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about them. يُوصِيكُمُ اللَّهُ فِي أَوْلَادِكُمْ لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ فَإِنْ كُنَّ نِسَاءً فَوْقَ اثْنَتَيْنِ فَلَهُنَّ ثُلُثَ مَا تَرَكَ وَإِنْ كَانَتْ وَاحِدَةً فَلَهَا النِّصْفُ. These are the fractions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is allocating to certain individuals. And we're going to talk about who they are in a moment. The second is residuaries. So residuaries are basically those individuals who receive whatever is remaining after the first category receive their allocated shares. And the third is who we call in Arabic, the second in Arabic, they're called asabat, right? And the third, they are called dhawil arham. So very seldom does this category actually inherit. It's these are basically people like your maternal grandfather, your maternal grandchildren. For those of you who speak Arabic, nana, nani, nawasi, these people, right? So this is seldom do they inherit from the estate of the deceased, only in the case where nobody else from the first two categories is present. So these, in English, we call them the distant kindred, dhawil arham. These are the dhawil furud. These are the people who are allocated a share from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inside the Quran, right? So the father, mother, husband, wife, daughter, full sister, uterine brother, uterine sister, granddaughter, consanguine sister, meaning the father is one, consanguine, and paternal grandfather, maternal grandmother. Right? So these people, if they are present, more likely than not, they will be getting something. And especially these, the father, the mother, the husband, the wife, the daughter, and the son. The son is not over here, he is in the second category. But these 6 individuals, if they are amongst your heirs, then they are definitely getting something no matter what. So you need to remember these 6 people. If your father, mother, husband, wife, son or daughter is alive when you pass away, then they are definitely inheriting. There is no question about it. Everybody else, there are certain situations where they will inherit, certain situations where they will not inherit at all, certain situations where they will inherit less than their allocated share because certain other heirs are present over here, right? So I know this sounds very complicated. That's because it is. And this is actually the nisful ilm, according to some of our salaf, that half of ilm, half of knowledge is distributing estate and distributing inheritance. So you're not expected to leave this seminar with a total understanding of how this is going to work. That's what your imams are for. You're going to go and sit with them, and you're going to explain who you're leaving behind, and they're going to help you allocate shares according to the way prescribed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And how much time do we actually have? So it's 7:30, so I have about just 15 minutes. So residuaries are those people, basically, it's just that. Residual means whatever is left, right? So residuaries get whatever is left. So certain residuaries, they only get residual, so they don't actually have a share that's prescribed to them. What is prescribed to them by Allah is after giving everybody else their dues, everything else goes to these residuaries. And certain other residuaries, their situation is a little bit different. They're not residuaries on their own right, but when they are in the presence of another residuary, they become residuaries themselves as well. So for example, the famous law that many of you know about, لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ, that the male child gets double the inheritance of the female child. So that is this category number 2 right here. So when the female is alone, she has a prescribed share that is given to her by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if she has a brother, then now she has to share that. So basically she becomes a residuary along with her brother, and the way their share is distributed is 2 to 1. right? So this is the circumstance that that many of us and many of the people in the media know about. So this category number 2 right here. So number 3, let's not worry about that right now. Residuaries in their own right, son, grandson, father, grandfather, brother, uncle, these are all residuaries, right? But keep in mind, that doesn't mean that if these people are present, they will automatically get what's left. It all depends on who is present at the time of your death. How many heirs you're leaving behind, because certain heirs will block out certain other heirs. So we give preferential treatment to certain. But you need to remember those 6. Which 6? Let's go through them. Father, mother, husband, wife, son, and daughter. So these 6 never get blocked. No matter what happens, no matter who's there, they always get a share of the inheritance, right? Everybody else, they could potentially lessen their share, or they could be blocked altogether. Residuaries in another's right, like I mentioned, daughter, granddaughter, full sister, consanguine sister. Can anybody define for me what a consanguine sister is? They have the same father but a different mother, right? So consanguinity in the English language is defined as somebody who shares a common descendant. But for the purpose of what we are talking about over here, we're talking about a consanguine sister. That means that her father is the same as her brother, but they don't share the same mother. So perhaps the father was married before, and both of his children are born to 2 different women, and they are brother and sister, but they are not full brothers and sisters. So that's a consanguine sister. And again, let's not worry about that. Now, what are we doing over here, right? So usually in a normal workshop, what I would do for you is I would give you this table, right? And I'm going to leave this table with the brothers at the Richmond branch, and maybe they can, it's actually from a book. So this is basically the conditions of inheritance. So all of the heirs and what they get in the presence or in the absence of who, right? So usually what would happen in a workshop like this, you would get this paper, and then we would go through what's happening over here. So since you don't have the paper, let me do it for you, inshallah. So somebody died, a man died. He left behind his wife, his daughter, his mother, his grandson, his maternal grandmother. Does anybody actually know how to do this? If there's somebody present over here that wants to do this for us? No? No? Does anybody know what, let's say, the wife gets? Right? Does anybody speak Arabic? You speak Arabic? Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot now. وَلَكُمْ نِصْفُ مَا تَرَكَ أَزْوَاجُكُمْ إِن لَّمْ يَكُن لَّكُمْ وَلَدٌ فإن كان لكم ولد فلكم الربع مما تركنا من بعد وصية يوصين بها أو دين. Right? So this is for the men. ولهن الربع مما تركتم إن لم يكن لكم ولد فإن كان لكم ولد فلهن الثمن مما تركتم. What does he get? He gets the wife gets 1/8. Right? So we are going over the laws of inheritance in the Quran. The wife gets 1/8. Right? الثمن. Right? So, let's see why. There you go. So she gets 1/8. Then the daughter gets half. The mother gets 1/6. The grandson is a residual heir, and the grandmother is blocked. The maternal grandmother, she doesn't get anything, right? Even though she's an heir, but she doesn't get anything. So basically, what we're going to do over here is we're going to divide this person's. It's much harder than it actually looks on the board, right? So these are just numbers. This is 24. Why 24? Why are we going to divide it into 24 parts?
Lowest common denominator.
Exactly. That's the lowest common denominator, right? So once you divide it into 24 parts, right? So this is what's going to happen at the end, right? Out of the 24, the wife will get 3, the daughter will get 12, the mother will get 4, the grandson will get 5, right? Now, keep in mind, you could do this using percentages, but the reason we do it using fractions is because fractions are so much more fun to add and multiply. No, that's not the reason. The reason is because fractions are the way it's mentioned in the Quran. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses fractions to assign shares, and it's easiest to do it like this. And of course, then there are other rules on, okay, how about this, right? What happens over here? Okay, let's. So you know the first one, right? We just talked about it. A thumun. Why does the wife get a thumun, the eighth? Because the deceased had children. He has a daughter. Then the mother, right? What does the mother get? Right? So that's right. She gets 1/6. And the father gets a sixth as well, right? Because he's also a parent of the deceased. And the father is also a residual heir. So basically what's going to happen with the father is he's going to get a sixth, and then if there's anything left over at the end, he's going to get that as well, right? So it's going to look something like this. He will get 4 shares of 24 because he is assigned a share by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and because there's one left over at the end and he's the residual heir, he will get that as well, right? So again, right now we're just assigning fractions. We're not going to go into actually dividing people's estates, and this is actually something I would usually have you do, but because we don't have time, right? When we list heirs, we list everybody. So if somebody's not there, that means that person doesn't exist. So it would be a different calculation, right? If the son is there. So that we just did this right here. So again, very quickly, this is how it's going to work. Again, 12 over here is the lowest common denominator. That's what's going to happen, right? Why does this happen over here, right? The daughter, she actually has a share in the Sharia, right? But because she is over here, she's alongside her brother, then now she becomes a residual heir. So if you look at this one down here, this is another situation that could possibly arise. This is how it's going to be distributed. Again, over here, I'm not explaining this because I don't have time, by the way. So this is the way it's going to be distributed, and this is the way this is going to be distributed, right? Okay, we're not going to talk about that actually. So that's it. That's all we're going to talk about right now, right? So basically, now that you've already seen it, what happens over here is either we're not going to have enough shares. The shares are going to run out before everybody gets their designated share, or sometimes we're going to have leftover and no residuary to give them to. So there are rules in place as to what happens with that, right? So the rule is not that whoever is preparing your will gets that. There are other rules, right? That who gets what's left behind, inshallah. We don't actually have time to talk about that right now because I'm going to take your questions, okay? So no, there's actually not time, sister, because we have about 10 minutes until the adhan. So I need to answer your questions. Yes?
You talked about debt.
Yes.
What about the debt of zakat, say, for instance?
Okay. So this is an excellent question. The brother's question is, we talked about debt that you owe people. How about if you haven't paid your zakat, right? That is also a debt. So what happens? Do we allow the allocation of your estate to the payment of zakat? The answer to that is no, we don't. Because debt that is between you and another human being is something that needs to be solved in this dunya. If you failed to give your zakat while you were alive, it is not expected that your estate will be allocated towards paying off that zakat, because this is dayn baynaka wa bayn Allah, between you and Allah. So it will not be settled over here. The only exception to this, and I will add to this, kafara. So if you have not fasted and you haven't given the kafara while you're alive, then we will also not use this money to give your kafara. If you have any other expiation that's due, if you haven't given zakatul fitr, or if you haven't, there are other things that if you didn't pray and you haven't made up those prayers, then what's going to happen, right? So all of these things, that your estate will not be allocated to that, because this is between you and Allah. The only exception to this was, remember the 1/3. So after we finish your burial expenses and your debt, we're going to divide the total of your estate into 3 parts. So you have the option that you can make a wasiyah. You can advise that 1/3 of your estate be used to pay off your remaining zakat, and that's binding. Islamically, that's binding on your heirs that they must use that, right? They must use that, and if the 1/3 dries up and your zakat is still outstanding, then it's up to them whether they choose to pay your zakat or not pay your zakat. So if they can, out of the goodness of their hearts, if they all agree and they want to do it, that's great. If even one of them disagrees, we will not lessen the share of that one individual because somebody has failed to pay their zakat. So chances are, right, in all seriousness, I have dealt with these cases. Your children are not going to pay your zakat for you. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but they are not going to pay your zakat for you. So, because money, once you reach under the ground, nobody cares about what you wanted, right? So your children are not going to pay your zakat. You can write this down, 9 out of 10, your kids are not going to pay your zakat. So pay your own zakat, right? They're not going to do it, no matter who they are and no matter,
Unless you put it in the wasiyah.
No. So out of the goodness of their hearts, nobody's going to do it. If it's legally binding on them, if it's in the wasiyah, then they will do it. Yes. Yes. So. See, when it comes to exchanging money, don't ever have a verbal transaction. Right? Bad idea. No matter who it is, no matter what it is, no matter if it's with your brother or your sister or your father or your friend or your neighbor or the imam or whoever it is, when money is at stake, don't have verbal transactions. The longest verse in the Quran is about kitabatud duyun. It's about writing down debts, right? Don't do that, right? Because, what about if he dies before that, right? Or what about if both of you are going somewhere and you die at the same time, hypothetically, right? Now his kids aren't going to accept that. They're going to say that you owe my father $10,000, or $10,000, you're lucky. If you owe him like $100,000, then what's going to happen, right? So no, again, because the dain is something that's binding, and yes, so there are 2 things over here, right? If that does happen, his question is, if somebody says that if you die before you can pay it off, then you don't have to pay it, right? Okay, so diyanatan, so between you and between Allah, that's okay, right? That's fine. That if you die in a state that you didn't pay it off, but if the kids come and ask for it, then qada'an, if they bring it to the mufti, if they bring it to the judge, then he doesn't care what you verbally agreed upon. What presents as fact is the matter that you owed him money. So these are 2 different things. So it's like somebody said that somebody goes and tells his wife, anti taliq. And he says again the next day, anti taliq. And he says again the 3rd day, anti taliq. But there's nobody over there, right? And then he goes to the judge and says that, I only said it once. Right? So now, because he's going to be asked to take an oath, and she's not able to present any witnesses. So inda Allah, that woman is not his wife. But because in this dunya we're only able to judge based on the apparent, then the qadi will say, okay, in the absence of the witness, and because you're ready to swear on this, she's your wife, right? But in Allah, she's not. In the court of Allah, that woman is not your wife. So we're entering into the realm of something that's between you and Allah. You know what is between you and Allah, but what we judge based on the apparent in this dunya is something different. Yes. Do any of the sisters have questions? Yes. So all of them, they're all included. So things that carry little value, that if all of them agree that they don't want to include that, but otherwise we include everything. So especially for sisters, so if you have gold, that is to be added to the totality of your estate, and again, it's not it's going to be distributed amongst your heirs, male and female, right? You can be as specific as you would like. So, because, some things are petty and everybody understands. Like, you're not going to put your phone and who gets it after you die in your will, right? That's understood, okay? But if it's, like, for example, if you own a home, that definitely needs to be there. But like things like, if you have a dishwasher and a spare computer, then no, that doesn't need to be that. Right? Yes? Okay. So there are two things over here. While you are, so the question was, somebody says that, if I die, my son is horrible, he doesn't talk to me, I hate his guts, so I don't want to give him anything, right? So after I die, he doesn't get anything, okay? So there are two things over here. While you are alive, you can give whoever whatever you want. So you could leave this room today and decide that, you don't like your son, he's not kind to you, so you're transferring the ownership of your home to your daughter. Great, you do that, it's your house, you're still alive, you have authority over your wealth, right? After you die, that doesn't work. So, when you're writing a will, basically you're giving instructions on what is to happen after you die. You don't have that authority after you die. Even if your son is a horrible person, so long as he's Muslim, he will inherit, right? So no, you can't do that. So if the advice I usually give people, because sometimes, yes, genuinely speaking, some people's kids are horrible people. They don't treat their parents kindly, or maybe one child out of all of them, they absolutely no respect for the parents, wants nothing to do with the family. So you take care of that while you're alive, right? You take care of that while you're alive, but you can't do that after somebody dies. Right? The only exception to that is if somebody has non-Muslim children. One of the rules of inheritance is that non-Muslims will not inherit from Muslims. So that includes your spouse. So if a Muslim man is married to a Christian or Jewish woman, she will not inherit from him. Right? So this needs to be understood. Anybody who is non-Muslim means anything but Islam. Right? And the only exception to that again was you could bequeath something. You can, out of the 1/3, you can say that, okay, even though my wife is Christian, she doesn't get anything according to the Sharia, but I want her to have something, so she can have this, right? Out of the 1/3, that's great. You can do that. You can give that to whoever you want. But if any members of your family who are getting something, they are not Muslim, and by Muslim, it's not you and I who's judging is Muslim. You just ask the person, are you Muslim? Even if they, there is no sign of Islam or practice of Islam anywhere in their lives, that's not up to me and you to judge. If somebody says they're Muslim, they're Muslim. That's it. End of story. They could commit whatever sin that they are committing. That's between them and Allah. But so long as somebody says that they are Muslim, inshallah. Yes. So ideally, you would want to do that as soon as possible, right? As soon as possible. But for more than one reason, sometimes that's not possible. That's what Samir and Stanley are going to explain, right? So if you're in Canada, you want to have an airtight will, something that's going to be enforceable. That's what they're going to be talking about after Isha, inshallah, how you can do that.
But then there is no point delaying it.
Yes.
For some other reason. Because there are sometimes in families, there are things happen and people don't want to do it.
No. So by consensus, if all of the heirs, they agree to delay it, then that's fine. But if even one of them wants to distribute, then everybody has to distribute. Right? We have time for just one question. Yes, sister.
All the heirs are there, but you don't want to give them the share. You want to distribute your sons and daughters only, you want to share the.
So if you have children, sons and daughters, then the only other people that would get anyways are if your parents are present, right? Otherwise, nobody else gets anything anyways. So people with children, children who anybody, so male or female children, the only other people that would ever get anything from the estate anyways is if that individual's parents are alive. If their parents are not alive, then it's case closed. Especially if you have male children, that pretty much seals the deal that nobody else is getting anything but your sons, right? So is the adhan going on?
We can go on for 5 minutes.
Okay, we can go on for 5 minutes. Yes, brother. Because we live in Canada, if you haven't done your will properly, it would be Canadian law. Not according to me, but just because we live here, right? So of course, according to me, I'm going to tell you that the Sharia law prevails, but people could care less what I say, right? So that's why it's important to do your will properly, right? So that's what they're going to explain to you, that what you need to do to ensure that it's done properly, right? Yes, somebody else had a question. Yes.
Husband and wife can make a common will if they agree.
So I would actually recommend that they make separate wills, right? Because in Islam, they are treated as separate individuals, right? So for example, most people, right, most sane people, they would have the name of both husband and wife on their home. So that's fine, right? So basically, during their lives, what this effectively means is that they own it 50-50. Regardless of who's paying the bills and who put the down payment or who put whatever, right? It's understood that they own 50-50. If you have a joint account, it's understood that 50-50, right? So as soon as one party dies, Islamically, the other party already owns 50%. And in the remaining 50%, they will get a share of the inheritance. And the reason this is important is, and I actually recommend that you have both of your names on your homes if you have homes. The reason this is important, right? Let's say the home only belongs to the husband, right? It's only his name, right? He's a really tough guy. He doesn't want his wife's name there. Really old school. Doesn't put his wife's name there. Now he passes away, right? If the children are unkind to their mother, they could force her to sell Islamically. I have no idea what goes on legally, but Islamically, they could say, listen, we have a share of this home and you are no longer the majority owner, so you sell it, right? Whereas if she already owns 50% and she has a share in the second 50, they can't force her to sell it, right? They can ask for their money and she'll have to give it to them. And if that means that she has to sell the home, then that's that. I'm giving you extreme circumstances. Usually your children are more understanding than this, right? They don't kick mothers out of their home, but it could happen, right? So, okay, well, we can take one last question, inshallah. Very quick question. Does anybody have a very quick question? Yes, sister. Sorry? Yes, so when your children are young, they are not mature adults yet, then you have to treat all of them equally. But when they are themselves, they are mature adults, then you can, for whatever reason, maybe one son lives with you, or maybe, a daughter, her husband is maybe passed away or something, and you want to give her something, that's fine. You can do that. Allah is the judge of your intentions, inshallah, right? Okay, so Jazakumullah khair.